Caballero, nadie se va a pagar con Watusi. ¿Pero por qué? ¿Le tienen miedo a Watusi?
Si este pie grande y feo a correr todo el mundo.
What's up, people? This is a fun video for me to make because I'm all interested in this type of crap. But let's talk about digital voice communications. It's a mouthful, but you have to use all those words because if you separate those words, it could mean a whole different thing, one scale to the other. We're just going to boil this down to the boots on the ground voice communications for, let's say, squad, inter-squad communications, small units, prepper families, just a small scale, the boots on the ground, like I said, the ground pounders. We're not talking about big organizational base camps and incident command posts and stuff like that. And we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of digital and see how that is going to affect us all to one extent or the other. Whether you like it or not, digital is going to be dominant here in the near future. It's just inevitable. There will be a place for analog, I believe. It's not going to go away, but digital is definitely going to dominate the scene here pretty soon. And there's really not much as far as info about the actual use of voice communications. I mean, there's a whole lot of people out there getting into it. Comm's Prepper, for one, coming out with EMCOMM and the D-Star system, which is a form of digital communications. So I'm going to put my 2 cents in this, but from a lower level sort of perspective, the end user. So there's many versions of digital radios out there, and just to boil it down, I'm going to just compare it to languages. So you have all these digital modes out there which corresponds to a specific language. Not in real life, but just as a comparison, an analogy. So here in the United States, the big one for public safety, your cops, firefighters, and EMS workers and stuff, you have APCO Project 25 or P25 digital mode. And what that is in a nutshell is there was a working group back in the 90s that sat down and decided to make one common language for all radios in the United States, so your cops could talk to your firefighters could talk to another fire support unit from another state, and if they used the digital mode, it will be the same language, and no matter what sort of radio you're using. So you could use a Motorola radio to talk to an EMCOMM radio. Under P25, both those radios are interoperable with the same digital language. So they didn't force the companies, or mandate. I don't know how it came about, but all the manufacturers out there that want to tap into the public safety communications market agreed to come up with this P25 language so all the radios could talk to each other. So let's say they speak Spanish. Apple P25 is Spanish. Then you have D-Star. D-Star is a amateur radio digital mode, and the manufacturer EMCOMM has pretty much are using that particular language that was developed by the Japanese, the amateur radio clubs in Japan. So they incorporated into the EMCOMM radios, and EMCOMM radios could talk to EMCOMM radios using the D-Star digital mode, which is totally different from P25. D-Star is speaking German, P25 is speaking Spanish. They can't speak to each other, but they still have a language in the digital form. Then you have Fusion. Fusion is a Yaesu sort of digital language, and they're speaking Italian. So Fusion, D-Star, APCO 25 cannot speak to each other. Amateur, another amateur, government, P25. Then across the pond in Europe, they use Tetra, and we'll call those guys Chinese. Tetra is Europe's version of P25 in a nutshell. Don't know too much about it, but that is the gist of it. And then you have another digital language called DMR, and we'll call them Afrikaans, the South African language down there. So even though all these guys here are talking digital, you know, the ones and zeros, not your, you know, not your analog signal, they all have different languages: Spanish, German, Italian, Chinese, Afrikaans. And that is the big difference between all these modes, is that they are speaking. You hear sound coming out of their mouths, but they're speaking in all these different languages, and they could only speak to their own groups. Some are similar, like Italian and Spanish. They sound very similar, but they can't really comprehend each other except for a few words. Same analogy. Unfortunately, the amateurs here in the United States doesn't have such a thing as P25. Yaesu, for instance, and EMCOMM, they both have digital modes, but they're in different languages, and they can't talk to each other. It would be nice if they did have a common interface language to talk digital, but they're not mandated or anything like that, so they're not going to do it. D-Star, as far as a digital mode for EMCOMM, is the most used here in the United States and the most widely sort of distributed around, you know, the United States. They have their own networks. It's working very well, and it's pretty good. Yaesu, they try to crack that nut for quite a few years, but it hasn't really taken off like D-Star has, but they try. So what we're mostly familiar with is analog communications, analog voice communications, walkie-talkies, from when you were a kid to all the Bofeng stuff and Chinese radios that we have today, for the most prepper guys out there and whatnot. That mode is the simplest and the most widely form of communications out there. And the big difference between analog and digital communication is analog is like playing a piano. So you're hitting the keys, you hit the key on the piano, that's going to set off a little hammer that's going to hit the string, and the string is going to sound. It's very organic and physical. It's just physical key press, the lever will go, it'll hit the string, and you hear your sound. Digital will be like a synthesized piano. So you hit the key, it's going to send out an electrical pulse, it's going to go through some circuitry. That circuitry will determine what it is, and go through a computer and all sorts of electronic and electricity. And then at the output of the speaker, you will hear your tone, and they could sound exactly the same as the analog piano sound. So the big difference is you can't really do too much with the analog piano. It's just one sound. It's going to sound the same way no matter what you do with it, unless you detune it or whatever. But a synthesizer, you could recreate that same tone and mix it up a bit and put some distortion, sound effects, make it sound like frogs singing. Who knows? The same thing with these radios here. An analog radio is pretty much stuck on that, but a digital radio, you can have more flexibility and options out there. As far like encryption will be easy, and there's some other advantages and of course disadvantages. So that's the difference between analog and digital. So this is what a digital signal sound like on an analog radio. It kind of sounds like static, but when I switch this radio into the digital mode,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Analog mode, same frequency, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. They're not compatible. And the frequency that I'm using is 146.65 megahertz VHF in the ham band, and that frequency is designated as an experimental sort of frequency where you could go and play and experiment with your stuff and all that. So I'm not interfering. I'm using a band plan. When you have a amateur radio license, you can do all this stuff live, provided that you call out your call sign. Now here are two radios here. They're both digital capable. This one is a Yaesu FT1 Delta, and it does use the digital modulation method of C4 FM. You don't really need to know that. This one also has that modulation method of C4 FM. So you will figure both these radios could talk to each other. Remember, this one is Yaesu and this one is Project 25 digital. This one speaks Spanish and this one here speaks Italian. They're both similar and sound similar, but it's a different language which they won't be able to really comprehend each other except for a few words. So this is what this sounds to this guy here. Sounds like static. Now let's see this guy talking to this guy. Same thing. The other way around. They're both transmitting digital, but we're listening in, but they cannot comprehend each other. Here's another Spanish radio coming in, APCO P25. Of course, they can listen to it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4. So they're both in the digital mode, but they're speaking the same language of Spanish. Here's our Italian guy right here. He can't comprehend what they're talking about. So when you're picking out radio, make sure they all speak the same language. Unfortunately for amateurs, if you get an EMCOMM radio that is digital capable, you got to buy another EMCOMM radio or another radio that has the chipset for D-Star. Yaesu, you're pretty much stuck with other Yaesu radios. Public safety radios, they will all talk digital to each other, but they're freaking expensive. The Baofangs and Wuxans, I think they have digital radios out there and they do the same, but you would have to buy the same make. They're not interoperable. So that's a what to look out for type of deal. So that was a brief, in a nutshell, difference between all the modes and digital, analog, and all that good stuff. But what does all that crap mean to the regular ground pounder out there? What does it really mean to performance out there where it counts? For a digital signal, on this chart here, this line up here going up and down is your clarity. So down here is pretty poor quality and up here is high quality. Now as you go distance from 0 to miles going out this way, on the digital signal you start off with pretty high clarity at your destination point, at your start point there. As you go out into distance, the clarity will remain the same, a steady flat level just about. Then at a certain distance, that same level will just drop off dramatically over a cliff. Boom. So it'll be clarity, same clarity all throughout. At this point there, you lose communications completely down into the dirt the farther you get away. Now for an analog signal, which is depicted by this red line here, it's more of a curve. So the clarity is very high when you're right next to your buddy talking, but as you go in distance, you hear a little bit of static. A little bit of static. You hear a little bit of sizzling bacon around this point here. More sizzling bacon. And at a certain point here, the sizzling bacon is actually overpowering your voice. You can still make out some voice. It's still comprehensible. You can still make out what he's saying a little bit farther from what the analog signal is. So at this point right here, it's really poor clarity, but you can still make out what he's saying at a little bit farther distance than the digital signal. And we're going to demonstrate that right now. So our test model, here I got a service monitor here that could do digital mode and test for other stuff as well. And right now we're going to do analog. Jane plane analog that's been the standard for the last 100 years or so. This is going to be the analog piano, and it's going to recreate that signal and transmit in a very low level onto this antenna here. The low level signal that this is going to produce is going to simulate distance. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the generator, and there's my strong signal there. And it's transmitting that 1 kilohertz tone. So let's take a walk and pay attention to the clarity. As I walk, so I got a little bit of static just going up these stairs. So I'm marching, humping along. A little bit of static there, but you can still make out the tone. You can still make out the tone, but you hear static. Okay, so we're at this location here at the burn pile. I'm going to walk around the house. You can still make it out some. You can still hear the tone. Now the house is in the way, so the signal is not passing through the house. The garage is on the opposite end of this. The garage. So that is pretty much what we're all used to hearing and seeing out in the field. The farther you go away from your buddy talking, the more static you're going to hear in the transmission. And if you go through buildings or canyons or terrain that without line of sight, you're going to hear that difference of static and legible voice. Now let's try that same test in the digital mode. Now in the digital mode, it's the same setup. I got the same amount of level coming out of this antenna to simulate distance as we walk away. But the only difference is, instead of hearing that 1 kilohertz tone on the speaker here, in the digital mode I could do a stored speech pattern. Some girl or guy talking randomly in sentences. We can't really do that in the analog mode. It's just not built that way, but at least here you can see the difference. So I'm going to turn this generator on.
His clothes have some false cuts.
They are too loud in church.
A young child should not suffer fright. Acid burns holes.
So that's the voice test pattern.
Petals fall with the next puff.
Now we're going to walk away.
Where were they when the noise started?
Slash the gold cloth in ribbons. Schools for ladies teach charm and grace.
Live wires
They're clear.
should be kept covered. The wreck occurred by the bank on Main Street.
A cloud of dust stung his...
But the digital radio is clear, crystal clear.
Slide the box into that
There we go.
space. It is late morning on the old wall clock.
Glass will clink when struck by metal. He smokes a big pipe with strong contents.
They took the crosstown bus.
Velcro trash on the street. These shoes were black and brown.
We crackle those people.
Okay. We got a little bit of crackle there. I'm going to turn around.
His clothes have some false cuts.
They're too loud and
Now that's the point where the radio starts to cut off a little bit. Instead of hearing the voice come in with a little bit of static in the background, you're hearing the clear voice, but it cuts in and out. You hear some of that digital data?
the wreck occurred by the bank on Main Street.
And I'm just moving my torso. Right there starts to cut out. That's because it's not receiving all those data bits in its full form. It's distorted. They call that a bit error rate. So when that bit error rate gets so high, the radio cannot distinguish the language coming in anymore. Whereas in analog, you can still hear the tone and the background noise. But with the digital radio, it's either on or off. Now let's walk a little bit more to our wood pile here. So here we are in the wood pile where we lost communications altogether. But if I turn around,
Schools for ladies teach charm and grace.
listen to the clarity.
Live wires should be kept covered. The wreck occurred by the bank.
As if that transmission is right next to me. That person is right next to me.
Every child is a small
Canned pears lack full flavor.
So that is the advantage of digital communications. The clarity of the voice is like if the person is standing right next to you. But if you go outside the fringe of the radio's capability of understanding that digital data coming in, it's going to cut out completely rather than give you static like an analog radio. Okay, there's the
Where
fringe
were they
point.
when the noise started?
Slash the gold cloth and long ribbons.
Okay, it's kind of distorted there, the voice.
Live wires should be kept covered. The wreck occurred by the bank on Main Street.
A cloud of dust stung his tender eyes. A joy to every child is the swan boat.
Okay, let's walk a little bit more.
Flavor.
We lost it completely there. We're right in front of the house now. Or the opposite end of the garage. Still nothing here. I've lost it completely. Where the analog signal, I can still hear the tone legibly with static. Let's go closer. Still nothing. Still nothing. At this point, it was getting clearer. Closing in on the garage now.
Wool cloth.
The petals fall with the next puff of...
Right there in front of the
Where
garage.
were they when the noise started?
Slash the gold cloth into fine ribbons.
I lost it completely there. It's an off and on phenomenon. There's no sort of grace period between not being legible and being legible.
And pears lack full flavor.
On.
The houses are built of red clay bricks.
Completely off.
Glass will clink when struck by metal.
So there's your differences between the two modes. One has an advantage over the other, and the other one has a disadvantage over the other. It just depends on your mission, on what you want to accomplish. As I know right now, the fire service does not use digital, maybe in some smaller cities and whatnot, but law enforcement certainly does among other municipalities and services and stuff like that. So I do quite a bit have to sit down with these guys and tell them the difference and say, oh, you're not getting any communications in a certain distance. This is why. It cuts out completely. You won't hear static. I find myself sort of explaining this whole evolution to them, to sort of let them know what to expect, because a lot of these guys are used to the old analog way, where you could still hear a little bit of static. You could somewhat make out what they're saying in those fringe areas. But digital is another ball game. You have to sort of know that the digital signal is going to drop out completely. And if you're not aware of that, you're going to think your radio's all bum, and you're not going to have the confidence to do what you set out to do. So that's pretty much the experience that I see out there in the field in real life situation of, the differences between the two modes. And your awareness is what's going to be really important as to how to, deploy this out in the field. Digital has a lot of advantages. Like I said, the voice clarity is like speaking to the person in the same room, even though you're miles apart, where in an analog signal, you're going to hear a little bit of static here and there, a little bit of sizzling bacon. But on the other extreme, if you get out of the range of the repeaters or your buddies talking on the radio, it's going to be night and day. Comms and no comms, on and off, where in analog signal it's a little leeway. It's a gradual progression of good signal to poor signal. And most of you guys are familiar with that, but are not familiar with the digital mode of operation as far as tactical voice operations. And that's what really counts out here in the real world as far as what method you want to employ. Your ground pounders out there, they don't care about the technology. They just care that if I press this button and talk, my buddy on the other radio is going to listen to me, and vice versa. That is the bottom line, boiled down to its rawest element. We could talk technology all day long, and I could have decades of videos about it, but the bottom line is operator A talking to operator B. Who cares what happens in between? Okay guys, with that, adjust your tactics if you choose to go digital, and know of the limitations and the advantages of it. Alright guys,